We are about to start our events with Mara Yamauchi, marathon distance runner, and Sharon Davies, silver medalist at the Olympics for swimming. They will be here at the UnHerd Club to discuss everything women's sports. We will, of course, hit the hot topic of the inclusion of trans women in the Olympics and beyond. So join us if you want to see all of that and join for the audience Q&A at the end. If you want to get more than the first 20 minutes, then you'll have to be a subscriber. Go to unherd.com/live, sign up, become a member of UnHerd. You get everything UnHerd has to offer, plus the whole of this brilliant event. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the UnHerd Club for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and for those who are returning, a very special welcome back. It is lovely to see you all on this fine evening. Tonight is an event that has been quite a long time in the making, but something I'm really excited about. Sport, you probably know, is perhaps the most glaring example of the inevitable trade-offs caused by the overhauling of biological sex in favour of gender, perceived, I think, by many, myself included, as a less toxic entry point into a highly combustible culture war around transgender identity. In athletics, boxing, swimming, the physical differences of male and female bodies is completely unavoidable, as the American cartoon South Park pointed out in their ever subtle and sensitive way quite recently. Unlike more philosophical or perhaps emotion-led arguments in the transgender debate, sport relies on very exact science. Tiny margins of time can make or break a world record, and in fact a whole career, which can pivot on 1/10 or 1/100th of a second. But to some, the question of trans women in women's sport in particular has become what they see as the thin end of the wedge, leading to the exclusion of trans people from wider public life. But if left alone, would a free-for-all on gender end in the death of women's sport altogether? To answer that question tonight, I'm joined by two women fully embroiled, you might say, in this conversation, who I'm absolutely thrilled to be here alongside. Mara Yamauchi, the elite marathon runner to my far right, not politically, just physically. Mara is an Olympian who holds the 5th fastest marathon time by a British woman. And also, if that wasn't enough, she has a degree from Oxford in PPE and was a diplomat in Japan, because some people don't like leaving any achievements to the rest of us. Sharon Davies is, of course, a swimmer, an Olympian, and won silver medal, I should say gold medal, of course, in the 400-meter individual medley. In the 1980 Moscow Olympics, the winner was an East German found to be illegally doping, so it's fair to say she has skin in the game. She is author of a brilliant book, Unfair Play, The Battle of Women's Sport, and I spoke to her about that book about 2 years ago on UnHerd. And then since then I've met the women who work for Scene in Sport. You might have seen their signs on the way in or just behind Mara and Sharon here. They advocate for fairness and safety in women's sport. We'll speak to them a little bit later this evening. But they thought that a gathering here at UnHerd might bring the conversation to a new and interested audience, which sounded like a good plan to me. So here we are. Please welcome Sharon and Mara to the UnHerd Club. Okay, a bit of housekeeping now, just to bring the tone down. We're going to do 45 minutes of talking here on the stage between the three of us. I'm going to ask all the idiotic questions that all of you have already thought about and spun over in your heads for many months, but I'm going to ask them here, and then we are going to get to the Q&A. For those watching online, if you are not a subscriber to UnHerd, then this stream will cut off in 15 minutes. Your free preview will be over, and you won't be able to watch any more of this event, unless, of course, you do the right thing, which would be to subscribe to UnHerd. It is less than the price of a coffee every month, and I would say it brings you a lot more energy and vigor than a coffee ever could. You will get not only the rest of this live stream, but everything else UnHerd has to offer, and that also applies to all of you in the room. Please do become subscribers. It is well worth it. We will take a 10-minute break after that 45 minutes to grab a drink from the bar, and then we'll come back and do an audience Q&A. There's so many of you here that I want to hear from as many of you as possible, so we're going to give extra time to all of you to ask your questions. So let us begin. I suppose we should just do a brief kind of run through of why we're at where we're at today. I've been reading around this subject in preparation for this event and was kind of surprised, I guess, to find that between the 60s and the 90s, anatomical sex testing was pretty normal in most sports. It was abandoned in the 1990s in favor of this thing called gender. From the 2000 Sydney Olympics onwards, there were no tests other than self-identification. And then from the mid-2000s onwards, you probably all know the story, there was a steady increase in the number of people self-identifying as transgender, seeking hormone therapy and surgery, some undergoing medical transition, but some not undergoing any kind of medical transition at all. The popularity in recent years of the idea of non-binary and non-operative trans identities, which require no medical intervention, has inevitably led some of those people wanting to become athletes. So, only this week on Sunday, we saw Henry McLeven, who won the Oregon women's 5,000-meter junior varsity race by over 2 minutes. On Monday, Liam King won the women's fixed gear race at the Oakland Grand Prix in Livermore. And what might they have in common? I will let you imagine. Naively, I suppose, I thought a conclusion had been reached at the moment when we found out that swimmer Leah Thomas, who you've probably all heard of, was not going to be able to compete under the FINA rules. But clearly that was not the kind of seismic shift in sport that maybe some of us lay people saw it to be. Where are we at now? What is the state of play of women's sport?
So, evening everybody. Leah Thomas, 6'4", certainly helped us in the world of swimming. I mean, we shouldn't have to have a Leah Thomas in every single sport, but that's almost what it almost seems to be. It was a ridiculous situation. This was a 6'4" male who really was a distance swimmer, and not a terribly good one at that. Was very much in the 500s in college swimming. So this isn't 500s in the world. This is just 500s in college swimming in America. So really quite an average male athlete who transitioned and then became NC2A champion, beating 3 American Olympic silver medal freestyle swimmers. And with a terrible stroke and a terrible start, and, terrible splits, and just everything that was possibly could do wrong, because it was a little bit like Mo Farah going in and winning the 100. I mean, that's how utterly ridiculous it was. And everybody in sport knew it, and everybody in swimming, absolutely knew it. And they also could look at splits and see that, that they were slowing down where they should have been speeding up, and that, that it was just not a genuine, proper race. And everyone in sport knows when you're talking at this level, the differences are minute. You have to look at the marathon yesterday. Oh my goodness, wasn't that amazing? The won the marathon by thousandths of a second. So we're winning international races by the smallest margin, and we're going to give away 10% to someone who's biologically male and say that doesn't matter. And it was just so galling, because obviously having lived through the East German era, where we had the East German state doping their athletes, making a massive difference to their female performances, not so much to the male performances, but to their female performances. They could take an average athlete, improve them by, on average, 9%, and make them, world record holders and world champions literally within the space of 2 years. And they were giving these young girls drugs from the age of 11, which had huge negative side effects on them, but they didn't care. It was just the East German system, East German men in grey suits, wanting these girls to be, to go out there and win medals for them. And obviously I saw all of that. So when this started to happen again in 2015, and the IOC decided that they'd throw women's sport under the bus without even talking to a single elite female athlete, and yet they brought trans-identifying males, average trans-identifying male athletes, to Lucerne to talk to them, to give them evidence as to why they should be in women's sport, but didn't speak to a single female elite athlete. I just couldn't believe that they were going to do it all over again. So that's why I just couldn't stay quiet. I mean, I just couldn't. So, yeah, it just wasn't fair. And obviously, some sports are much bigger than 10%. So the average is about 12%. Probably middle distance running. Distance running is probably the narrowest.
But running is 10 to 12% at elite level, but below elite level, and as you age, the gap gets bigger. Yeah.
But weightlifting, it's 30%. And something like boxing, a male will punch a female 160% harder. onto a less dense bone structure. So when we had 100 males men in the women's FA game in this country, a large proportion of them were in goal. Because, of course, they were much taller with bigger hands and much more dynamic, and they could make a massive difference by being in goal. So, it was already incredibly unfair, and no amount of reducing testosterone, will ever level the playing field. And we have a thing called a Q angle, which is the angle between your hips and your knees. And that's nearly twice, 50% more in a woman for obvious reasons, for childbirth. And that means that you can be so much more power can be brought through, from the lower body for running, cycling, anything really, where you're going to be, even kicking on freestyle in the swimming pool. That's never going to be removed either.
So you noticed that there was a kind of fallacy in the science here, that they'd actually someone was misreading the science somewhere.
Well, there was no science. So they employed a trans-identifying male scientist to prove that 11 men should be in of which the one person out of those 11 who self-reported that they got slower as they got older, surprise, surprise, the one that actually said, well, I started training and I got better, they took them out as an outlier and didn't even include them in the results.
So you're quite early on in this kind of, you're one of the early people in this debate to be getting involved and actually questioning whether or not this was scientific.
From the moment they said it, I just thought, I cannot sit here and watch another bunch of young women, lose out on what is potentially their life-changing opportunities because women's sport is being thrown under the PC bus as disposable.
I suppose you had the backing of your own experience there, that you could actually call upon this prior experience of the doping of these German athletes. Mara, how did you enter this debate? I mean, you're perhaps a later entry, but still, you are now here sitting on this stage alongside Sharon. So how did you find yourself here?
So in 2017, 18, 19, I was following this debate, but my father was really ill, and any spare time and energy I had beyond sort of work and everything else you have to do in life, I sort of had to, look after him. But then in 2021, a few things happened at the same time. So I saw a tweet from Sharon which said, if you are silent in this, you are complicit. And Maya Forstater won her appeal, and Laurel Hubbard qualified for the Tokyo Olympics. And I reached a point where I thought, I can't stay silent any longer. A female weightlifter is not at the Olympics. It took me 24 years from having a dream as an 11-year-old to standing on the start line at the Olympics, and I just thought, this is just so wrong, I have to speak up. And as soon as I sort of entered the debate, I kind of couldn't leave. And
it does work. It does slightly work like that.
It sort of escalated from there. And the more you sort of look into it in different angles, not just sport, but prisons and the medicalisation of mostly same-sex attracted children, etc., the more you just see the horrors of it, and I mean, it becomes a full-time job.
You opened a Pandora's box a little bit.
Yes. So I'm a sort of Josephine come lately, if I can put it like that, to this debate. So I really take my hats off to people like Sharon and Fiona and Nicola Williams, all the others who were, in the trenches during the early years, which actually were much more tough in terms of the abuse you received, people refusing to listen, etc., than it has been in more recent years. So I'm under no illusion that, I really owe it to the likes of Sharon and the others I mentioned, the organisations which had sprung up already.
It's clearly still a very vital question, though, one that, the likes of me, who is not, involved in sports in any way, thinks, well, now the Leah Thomas question has been answered, that's it, we're in the clear, and I guess, you're actually still in the trenches very much.
But that was answered for aquatics. So aquatics, then went to their major conference and voted on it. And even with the obvious situation with Leah Thomas, it was still 70%. There was still 30% in that room that knew swimming inside out that thought that it was okay for Leah Thomas to be racing, women. I mean, that's atrocious, it really is. I don't believe anybody that voted for that position should even be there. They should have been gone instantly. And anyone that's voting for it now on a board doesn't know the first thing about sports, so should they not be on any sports board? It is really, really frustrating. I mean, obviously, the hardest part of the early years that Mara's talking about was the no debate. Yeah. I mean, God, it was just so difficult to even be able to present the science. you know, and get people to actually look at the facts and the statistics and, you know, the obvious nature that the reason we have different categories across sport is to give people opportunity across society. And the biggest difference is male and female.
Can I answer your first question?
Of course,
so
yeah.
Everybody knows what sex they are. You know, we're all here because of two biological sexes. So I just don't believe that people who say, you know, sex is a spectrum, it's male-female difference is, you know, is muddy and everything. They had motivations for allowing men and women's sport. One was money, because if you're a male, you know, it's very lucrative competing in women's sport because of the gaps. Women and girls just aren't valued. Women and girls sport just isn't valued. You know, all these different reasons, and then the success of the trans lobby in infiltrating institutions. So if you look at the policy, the IOC policy of suppressing testosterone, they say, well, you know, therefore it's fair, so men can be in women's sport. It's obviously not true. It's obviously not fair. You don't need lots of scientists to prove that. But I think they wanted men and women's sport, and therefore they had to come up with a sort of plausible sounding explanation or way to do it, and testosterone suppression was sort of magicked up as if that would, you know, be a sort of convincing sounding way to do it. I don't believe for a moment that anybody truly didn't know about male and female and about male advantage. I mean, to learn about male advantage, all you need to do is look at the history of, let's say, the marathon or the 100 meters or an event where men and women do exactly the same thing, and just look at the differences in times. You don't even need scientific experiments. I mean, in things like how much power can you put onto a ball, yes, that needs to be measured in a lab. But the results of sports where men and women do the same distances, swimming, running, other sports, any child can learn that within 30 seconds. So, you know, the claim that, oh, we're not quite sure if male-female performance gap exists and blah, blah, it's just nonsense.
What about when it's kind of visualised in reality? Because I suppose that's even more confronting. You spoke about parkrun earlier. I wonder if you could use that as an example. Like, what are you seeing in the real world that actually brings this to life?
So there are a lot of men competing in the female category in parkrun. Parkrun had sex categories, male and female. People will tell you they didn't, but I've seen documents in which they talk about sex from previous years. And then in 2019, they decided on self-ID. And at the beginning of this, I sort of thought, well, you know, personally, I don't have a problem with being female, but I can understand that for other people, their sex may be a big problem for them. And, you know, I accept that other people may feel like that. So these two additional categories they brought in, another gender identity and prefer not to say, I kind of thought, well, that's a reasonable way to accommodate people who really, you know, don't want to declare their sex. But then what I saw was loads of men not availing themselves of those third categories and instead going in the female category. And
so the argument that some people make, which would be, it's okay because we could have a different type of games that would be for people who don't want to identify
we know that's
one way
not
or the
true, though,
other.
because World Aquatics, when they did their conference and they turned around and decided to protect the female category, they put a trans-identifying category in our first World Cup in Berlin that year, and not a single trans athlete turned up. So it has absolutely nothing to do with wanting to compete or be included. It's all about wanting to win. It's wanting to have an unfair advantage in the women's category. Because we only see it one way, right? It doesn't go the other way. You know, men are not losing their trophies and their opportunities all over the place. You know, it's just not happening. It's only women that are expected to give up their opportunities.
I think I agree with Sharon that doing well in a sport is one motivation. I think another motivation is certainly validation and being seen as a woman. Because there are plenty of men in the female category in running and in parkrun who aren't near the front. There are a lot near the front, but there are plenty who aren't. And I think for them it's the validation of others viewing them as a woman.
Well, it's trying to force other people to view them as a woman.
But at the end of the day, to me, motivation is irrelevant. Whether it's winning or validation or something else, motivation is irrelevant. If you're a man, you shouldn't be in the female category, end of.
I find it so interesting at the Olympics. We have 2 or 3 non-binary females, and every single one of them runs in the women's category. Isn't that funny?
One of them, Nikki Hiltz, when World Athletics announced that they were going to do sex testing, she said something about throwing arms. She said, you know, if anyone comes at me with a cheek swab, I'm going to kick off. Something like that. She sort of indicated her opposition to it and that she wouldn't do it. And lo and behold, she did it. And she's just come 5th in the 1500. So, you know, obviously, she would never, ever have qualified in the men's category because women run 20-odd seconds slower than the men.
I'm going to ask a really basic question now, which is, what are the advantages that someone has gone through male puberty? Because clearly we are differentiating here male to female versus female to male, transgender.
Well, it's all the things that we just mentioned. So, you know, it's nothing new that you don't know about. I mean, you know, there is a big biological benefit to having more testosterone in your system, even from when you're first born, you know. And
so this actually is, you know, because the next question obviously is, you know, what happens if someone takes puberty blockers, doesn't go through male puberty?
I mean, it may reduce some of the benefits, but it still gives them an advantage because they will still have that Q angle that I mentioned earlier, which will not go. And we can show you through documentation and statistics that 8-year-old boys can run faster, jump higher, and throw things further. That's 8-year-old boys.
So, some of the, I mean, I can answer that, but give you examples relative to running. So different levels of hematocrit, hemoglobin, greater muscle mass, lower fat percentage, bigger heart, bigger lungs, Q angle, etc. But there was something like 5,000, I think. Number. If there are scientists in the audience, please correct me. But there's something like
puberty. Sorry, doesn't that come in after puberty?
Well, so the differences between male and female before puberty. Greg Brown has done good studies on this. There's something like 4 to 7% in athletics. So the gap is smaller than after puberty, but it is still significant.
Is there any way, with the technology we currently have and the hormones we currently have access to fully obviate the kind of male advantage?
No. Well, as I've just said, you can't. You can't remove the Q angle, so you will not be able to remove the shape of someone's hips. So if they're biologically male, they will have a narrower Q angle, which enables them to put more dynamism between, you know, from their legs. They will be taller. They will have bigger hands. You know, there is lots of things. So there is not a single piece of peer-reviewed science in the world that shows you that you can remove all male puberty advantage or even all male advantage. So we're going against all the science.
I think this is an ethically very slippery slope as well because you know, some sports federations have said, well, UK Athletics is an example. They've banned post-puberty males from the female category in March 2023. And so then the question is, well, a boy put on puberty blockers before beginning puberty, can he then compete in the... He can actually compete in the female category. But, you know, to do that to a child at such a young age is just totally wrong, in my view.
So it becomes a kind of secondary incentive, not just about affirming the gender, but actually having success in this career that perhaps a child has shown interest in.
And I think some of the governing bodies which have gone down this path may face legal action in the future from males who were transitioned as boys by their sort of uber ambition.
Well, folks, that's it. If you are not a subscriber, then that's all you're going to see tonight, unless you go to unherd.com/live. Become an UnHerd subscriber. You'll get everything we have to offer. That's long-form articles, video investigations, and our brilliant live-streamed events, like this one with Sharon Davies and Mara Yamauchi. You'd be mad to miss it.